how's it going? I'm Chris Ferrone from the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism and Beyond Boston. And we have a very special episode of Beyond Boston for you today. Why? Because it's about places just like this one, the Somerville Media Center, and places all around the state just like it. They're amazing places. Now listen, take it from me. I've done a lot of regular television news. I've been in half the newsrooms around Boston, you know, the big TV ones with all the lights and everything like that. And it's just not the same. You know, you walk into those places, the people there barely know each other. Everything's really, you know, moving a little bit too fast, frankly, for my taste. Meanwhile, you walk into a place like this, the Somerville Media Center, or into Cambridge Community Television, Brookline Interactive Group, Cambridge Community Television, any of the places that we do Beyond Boston at, and it's a real community. There's young people learning about media. There are newcomers who have, you know, never done anything in the media, really getting their feet wet, and there are veterans, people like me who have been around doing this for a while and who really like the freedom and the opportunity to connect with community firsthand. So on that note, there's a little bit of an issue here. Some of these places, they're being threatened. It's always been an issue, but since these resources are things that we use every week here, we're gonna protect them, and that's what we're gonna use this episode for. So coming up after this, you're gonna see Erica Jones from the Somerville Media Center sitting down with David Gauthier, the Vice President of Mass Access, as well as with State Representative Michael S. Day for the 31st Middlesex District. They're gonna be discussing issues and solutions facing community media centers. Following this segment, we're going to be watching a short advocacy piece on what does free speech mean to you. It's a video in response to some of the state and national rallies around First Amendment rights that have been going on. Then we're going to toss it over to Binge Network Director and Executive Editor of Dig Boston, Jason Pramus, for his commentary on the national issues facing media companies and consolidation. So with that, let's get going. I'm Chris Ferrone, and thanks for tuning in.
Greetings and welcome to this in-studio interview of Beyond Boston. I am Erica Jones, Membership and Outreach Director at Somerville Media Center and Vice Chair of the Alliance for Community Media Northeast Region Board of Directors. We are joined in the studio today with State Representative Michael S. Day of the 31st Middlesex District and David Gauthier, Board Member with Mass Access. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks for having us.
We will be discussing issues and solutions that are facing community media centers, specifically here in the state of Massachusetts. Some of these issues include public education and government access TV stations being listed as part of the electronic programming guide on cable television, as well as addressing the need for our TV channels to be broadcasted in not only standard definition, but also high definition. Both of these areas are a right and not a privilege for public access media stations, and today we will learn more about what Mass Access, as well as our State House, are doing to tackle these issues. David, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Erica.
And if you want to just sort of give an overview of what Mass Access is as a group and what the efforts are being done, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, Mass Access is a nonprofit group, which is it's a membership-based group. And we represent and advocate for community media stations across the state. So that's part of what we do. You know, we get together, helping startup organizations, and also lobbying up at the State House, working to make sure that the laws are put in place to protect community media and hope that we have a viable future.
Okay, and about how many media centers are part of Mass Access?
Right now there is about 150 organizations, as well as individual members, and business members as well. So we're going pretty strong at this point.
That's a pretty exhaustive listing there. That's good. That's good. Very impressive.
Could always be better.
Always. That's the name of the game. Right. Which is hopefully what we're going to be talking a bit about. What are some specific efforts that Mass Access has been pursuing as of late?
Well, right now we have a bill in both the House and the Senate. It is an act to support community access television. And what we're looking for with this particular bill is high definition, but really the wording of it is quality that's comparable to broadcast channels. And that's important to note too, because that leaves us a little bit open toward the future. So if the technology does change and high definition becomes the new standard definition, we have some room to advocate for ourselves and move forward with quality in the future. The other end of that, which you mentioned, is the electronic programming guide.
Right.
Right now, community media centers in Massachusetts don't have access to that, even those who have offered to pay for it. So it's very difficult for consumers to find the programs that they're looking for and to use their DVR functions and those kinds of things to record programming because they simply can't find it. So those are the two big items that are on this bill. It's currently in front of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities and Energy, to make sure I get that one right. And they're considering it, and we're hoping that it's going to come out with a favorable decision.
Okay. And are there other examples, maybe like in other parts of the country, where do people have, at other media centers, do other organizations have listings on their electronic programming guide?
Well, we know that Vermont recently passed legislation and got access to electronic programming guide through legislation. And, you know, I should note, too, that it's disappointing, in fact, that we have to go this route.
Right.
You know, we feel as though this is the kind of thing that should and could be negotiated with the cable companies. However, we have found that whenever these negotiations happen, that these sorts of things are off the table, right off the top. And, you know, that's why we're looking for help from the legislature. Now, Vermont did pass a bill that would allow them access to the electronic programming guide. So there is some precedent set. We know that
That's good.
There is some HD stations. Philadelphia, certainly. Down in North Carolina, there are some. There are a few out in California as well. So it's happening in certain places across the state. And we think with the highest concentration of community media centers in the country, Massachusetts is certainly due for an upgrade.
We are the mecca of community media, and that is often what I am sharing. So clearly there is a need, and like I said in the beginning, I think that it's not a privilege to have access to this type of information because it allows us to be competitive. I think it also allows the work that's being done at these media centers to be taken a little more seriously because there's wonderful local content that is being created, and to have equal playing field so people can cruise through the electronic programming guide and they can see it's not just 24 hours of public access or educational access. It'll identify this show is happening at this time with the description.
And I often say too, Erica, that it's an accessibility issue.
Right.
For those who cannot attend municipal meetings or cannot participate in certain community events, the Community Media Center is uniquely positioned to record those events and deliver those events to residents who can't otherwise participate.
Exactly. And so I will shift it over to you, State Representative, in that clearly this was an example of something worthy for you and your colleagues to want to take on. And from your own judgment, what would you say has been like an important aspect to this, why you want to put in some energy into this bill?
Yes, well, thanks for having me, Erica,
Absolutely.
first off. And I'm privileged to represent Stoneham and Winchester in the State House. I think I'm one of the few reps that has two towns all to myself, for better or worse for those towns. But I've fortunately, I've got WinCam, which is how David and I came to know each other, which is the local cable access channel in Winchester,
yes.
and Stoneham TV over in Stoneham. So two vibrant, really active local cable access channels that put on great content. And I was just sitting here listening to you talk exactly why I've supported this bill.
Right.
I can't make it to every Board of Selectmen meeting. I can't make it to every CONCOM meeting, Conservation Commission meeting. But I do watch them and record them.
Right.
The problem I've got is I'm recording 4-hour blocks now because the electronic program guide doesn't tell me or doesn't allow me to shut it off.
Sure.
Right? So that, selfishly, I want the EPG, the electronic program guide, in place so that I can keep up to speed on what's going on. But it's, media's changed over the last 15, 20 years, and it seems to me like the local cable access channels are now fighting for, as you said, a fair voice in this thing, or an equal voice, where they don't have to be, and they shouldn't be.
Right.
It's public broadband. It's for the public good, and these channels serve the public good. They provide local information, they provide local access. I know both of my channels, I call them my channels, but both of my channels provide a huge outlet for kids, for the students in our high schools. Two great programs that my son took advantage of in middle school over in Stoneham. And I've been grilled by a young man in Winchester who does a fantastic talk show.
He does, yeah.
And put me through more paces during the last campaign than anyone else ever did. So the worth, the worth of the programs to me are self-evident.
Invaluable, yeah.
And the fact that you've got, I think the last number I saw was about 7 or 8% of people watch standard definition now, right?
Yeah.
90 some odd percent are watching high def. And yet you've got to go flying through these 100 some odd stations to find your local channels.
Right.
So it's not accessible right now. It's not of a quality where it should be. I think the last number, David, and you may know as well, he had about 70% or more local cable access channels equipped for HD. So they're there. They're there to flip the switch.
Right.
But they can't access the HD.
And what is the
bands.
holdup is basically a good...
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Yeah.
I jumped on this bill last term, and again, co-sponsored it this term. We had a hearing in May. The legislative process itself is necessarily cumbersome and deliberative, which I think is, in some respects, a good thing because you hear certain things that you may not have thought of, right? So one of the arguments coming out in this, and I'm not saying they're meritorious, but one of them coming out is, well, this is a First Amendment issue, or this is a business issue, right? This is for the cable companies to negotiate individually with the local cable channels. And the legislature shouldn't get involved in that business decision, right? I come back to the point of this is a public good, and this is, you're utilizing broadband, which is out there for everyone to utilize. And government regulates that, and so I think we've got a right place here to regulate and say, hey, you've got to provide for what we believe and what I think everyone believes is a public good here.
A public utility,
yeah.
And so what is the name of the bill, just for folks who might not know who's watching?
An act supporting community access television.
And it's like
who can be opposed?
H.26.
Yeah, so it's H2682.
Okay.
I had to go to my cheat sheet. But who can be opposed to that, right?
Exactly.
That's why you love these titles of these
It's
bills.
true. Right. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it clear.
Yeah.
And about how many other colleagues are petitioned onto this?
I think last call there were north of 50, right?
Yeah, it was close to 80 the last time I counted.
Yeah, so it climbs.
Yeah.
And so that's an overwhelming amount of support
You've got
from
160
cross sectors.
House members and 40, so 200 total legislators, and you've got nearly half, jumping on board this.
And our very own Denise Provo, who's always been a longtime advocate for Somerville Media Center here, is also signed on. So what are the next steps for just kind of the nature of how this process goes? Because it can be very bureaucratic and
so
confusing.
procedurally, as David mentioned, it's in the telecom committee now.
Right.
There's a hearing in May on the bill. They're now deliberating and tweaking and fine tuning where they are, and then they'll what they call a poll. They'll put out a poll to their members of that committee, and they'll either vote favorable or unfavorable.
Okay.
If it's unfavorable, that pretty much dies for this term, and you have to pursue it again next term. If it's favorable, it moves on to the next level. Right? You're always told there's 6,000 ways to kill a bill and one way to pass it. So there's multiple hurdles to get something passed in the legislature. But I'm hopeful that this gets some real traction this time and we can get this discharged favorably from the committee.
Yeah, me too. And I'm sure the rest of many other media centers in Massachusetts. And hopefully just using this as a case study in a way and as a way for other media centers, other regional efforts around the country to maybe pursue similar type of lobbying and advocacy, because this should really be across the board. And like David's saying, we're obviously a huge collective of media centers, around 300 plus. So we're often looked towards as like the visionaries and the trendsetters. So,
well, it's funny, this is my second term in office, and in my first term, you'd get to the committee hearings and you hear these great proposals, and a lot of times you'd hear, well, how many other states are doing this? Well, nobody. Why does Massachusetts always have to be first?
It's true.
Right? So I'm sitting there, I'm like, what are they talking about? What does it always have to be first? This term, with the mess that's going on down in D.C., it's a flip. Who else is doing it? Well, why can't we be first and show the way for the rest of the nation? So, again, to this
I feel
piece,
as though that this issue, there is certainly some fear from the opposition. They don't want to set that precedent.
Yeah.
Because I think if they feel as though if Massachusetts falls, boy, we're looking at having to do this across the country. And
as you said, it's a shame that
it is
it's
a
gotten this
financial
far.
responsibility for them, but it's also federal law that they have to support this.
Absolutely. And that is an excellent point to remind people of, which any new person who comes into this organization, there's always kind of like, it may be boring backstory history of how community media came to be public access television, but it's important because it really did start out of the Telecommunications Act in the 80s. So yeah, very, very important history, and it's encouraging to know that we have support like yours and others at the State House. So is there anything else that we want to let people know about in terms of maybe getting more information or how they can help contribute in terms of comments or anything? I don't know if that's helpful. Or
Sure, absolutely. If folks want to get in touch with me, they can find me through the Mass Access website, which is massaccess.org. You can find me at Winchester Community Access. It's davidg@wincam.org. That's my email address. You can always ask questions if you want to. Let me try to go through that one more time. You can always get in touch with me if you want to ask questions and get further information about this legislation or any of the other issues that we're facing here in Massachusetts.
Excellent, excellent.
And I'd just say, contact your local legislators. Those who aren't on board yet. As I said, David reached out to me and educated me. We've got 7,000 some odd pieces of legislation that come through. And this may not be bubbling up to the top of the pile there. When you've got somebody reaching out, a constituent reaching out, or an interested party in your district that says, hey, take a look at this, we look at it. And so this did register finally for me when I was made aware of it. So the advocacy is key, but education is advocacy to me, right? Just getting out there and talking to your legislator about what this is, why it's important, and then the numbers start to grow.
Right. Yeah. Come prepared with some an elevator pitch and some boilerplate facts about some of the things that are going on.
And a personal narrative about why it's important, right? Because that's what moves the needle. We get numbers thrown at us all the time, but when you sit down and you say, we're not getting to where we need to get to, in the public market. People don't know we're out there right now,
right?
Because 90% are on high def, and we're not allowed on high def. I wasn't aware of that. Boom, there we go.
Yeah, you have to humanize the issue.
And I just did this week upload a form that has all the information on it. Makes it very simple for you to contact your legislators. Here's all the information on a sheet and a half.
Perfect.
So it's all in front of you when you do make that call. Yes. We're trying to make it easy on everybody, because sometimes if you're not used to making those phone calls, they can be a little intimidating.
Absolutely. Right.
So
I'm not
trying to make it certainly not you, but
and your track record's very impressive. I was perusing through your all the different bills that you're sponsoring or co-sponsoring. So
thanks.
Kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a good run so far.
Yeah, and keep on being a progressive human.
Thank you.
It's inspiring. It is. It is. Well, that is it. Thank you again for joining on this discussion. Obviously, this is not the end of this discussion, but we will continue on to keep everyone updated. And as listed on the screen, there's information to further contact anyone about questions you might have. And for Beyond Boston, I am Erica Jones, and thank you for joining us, and we'll go on to our next segment.
Well, so I'm not really 100% on what free speech means specifically, but I don't think it means like aggression against people who...
What does free speech mean to me?
Yeah, it's a complicated, it's hard to spitball on free speech a little bit, because I feel like there's the fundamental, you're allowed to speak your mind.
I think that free speech itself is very that wasn't a good thought.
What is it?
So freedom of speech is the freedom of expression. I feel like it's
we don't already know what is accepted or not accepted. We all have to grow together, you know, from childhood into adulthood.
Well, free speech is important to me because that's how society progresses. It's through dialogue and through expressing of views, basically exposing them to sunlight so they can be taken apart and the good bits pulled out and help society progress.
It's always good to really practice your voice to make sure our free speech doesn't get taken away and to make sure that our free speech isn't restricted.
I've recently been reminded a lot of a quote. It's a favorite of mine I think it's often attributed to Voltaire himself, but it was actually written by Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who wrote the biographies of Voltaire, and she wrote, I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. With freedom of speech in America, it's an all or nothing situation. The second that you start trying to curtail people's right to say things because of the content of the free speech is the second that you start opening the door for a downhill slide into censored speech.
Some people will say you have to allow all speech. It's difficult to say that because that allows people to organize very...
I don't think hate speech is free speech. I think that's dumb. People who think that are dumb.
I'm from a country that has a lot of restrictions on speech. I think America, probably more than any other country in the world, really has got free speech right.
It's really great, you know, because I tweet a lot of mean things about the president on my Twitter. And in any other country, like, I could die if I did that, but not here, you know? They can't get me.
Our role here, working at a community media center, is ever more critical because our goal is to, in some small way, disrupt the regular channels of who's allowed to speak and how they're allowed to speak. And so our role here as a community media center is to, in some small way, tip that balance back towards democracy and back towards, you know what, you don't have to pay a lot of money to be able to speak your mind, to be able to run a show, do a radio show, do a TV show, create a film, teach a class, right? That sense of empowerment of, giving everybody a voice. So that's what free speech means to me.
Democracy cannot function without media that's produced by the people and for the people. The United States has never quite reached that goal, but over the last century we've made considerable progress, notably with the rise of community media centers like this one, Somerville Media Center. In fact, there are now over 1,500 such centers in the U.S., including over 300 in Massachusetts alone. Community media centers are open to anyone and teach people the skills they need to produce content in video, audio, and even text for consumption by thousands of their neighbors. Many of these local producers then go on to careers at larger media outlets and take the ethos of democratic media with them. Unfortunately, this grassroots broadcast system is under threat nationwide in 3 ways. First, since their inception in the late 1960s, the main way the community media centers have distributed their content has been via cable TV, which makes sense because historically they've been able to negotiate deals with cable companies to pay a franchise fee of around 5% of their local income a year in exchange for cities and towns providing the cable companies with rights of way to build out their wires to every home and business. Depending on the agreement, the companies may also give grants and in-kind contributions to the centers. The fees and the contributions provide centers with studios, equipment, and paid staff. But cable companies like Comcast have never liked such deals and have worked hard to get out from under them. In several states like Connecticut, they've gotten laws passed that force municipalities to accept a one-size-fits-all deal, collect franchise fees at the state level, and then disperse them locally, which has led to decreased funding and the closing of some community media centers. That has not yet happened in Massachusetts. But meanwhile, the second big threat to the community media centers arose as telecom companies like Verizon started their own version of cable TV over the copper wires and lately fiber optic cables that they had already built out in most cities and towns in the country. Since the wires were already there and there was no tradition of charging telecoms franchise fees, the phone companies have mostly been able to avoid providing support for centers. Seeing that, the cable companies have started arguing, if they don't have to pay for the centers, why should we? Both cable companies and telecoms have also argued that the rise of the internet has made community media centers obsolete, as if its mere existence is a substitute for all the education, training, and local broadcast opportunities that centers provide municipalities. Finally, the Federal Communications Commission just ended an old rule requiring broadcast companies to have local studios everywhere they produce programming. That could soon result in calls to end funding for many community media centers by arguing that their physical presence is no longer required to allow the production of local shows. With these threats on the horizon, the best thing that you all can do to ensure the survival of America's community media centers is to get involved. So go right down to your local center, take a class, start producing content, and join with your neighbors to lobby at the local, state, and national levels to keep community media going strong, in the interest of our democracy. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramis.
Hello everyone, I'm Han Duo, and this here is Luke Skyrunner. So listen up, he's got something important to say.
Alright, make it quick.
Okay. Hello fellow Jedi Knights. I'm here to tell you that the media is with you.
No it doesn't. Amazon knows all the media.
It doesn't have to be that way. Look at us. We all look different, but what connects us is the need to tell our local stories and what matters most to us.
But how do we defeat Amazon?
We are the community. It's up to us to fight for our voice, to bring us together, and to make community media. Who's with me?
I am! Let's go to our ships and fight with everything we've got. May media be with us. Who is with us? Yeah!
Well, there you go, Luke. Your mission has just begun. Now go out and make media happen.
And with the help of the Jedi Knights, the voice of the community was heard throughout the galaxy. The end.